Okay, it's time for us to talk a little bit about a complex form of color fills called gradients. And this is something we haven't touched on yet, and something that can really add a layer of depth and texture to your designs. So I think it's very important that you understand how to work with and use the gradient tools inside of Illustrator. Over here on the left-hand side of this artboard, we have several versions of gradients that you can see here. We have a horizontal linear gradient, a vertical linear gradient, and we have a radial gradient and the reverse of a radial gradient. These are the most basic forms of gradients that you can create inside of Illustrator. And so what I want to do is show you how to replicate this on these four squares down here at the bottom. So let's select this first square here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the gradient tool. With the gradient tool selected, if I click and drag across this piece of artwork while it's selected, it's not going to do anything. And that's because there are no gradient fills being applied to this particular shape yet. So what I have to do is apply a gradient fill to it first, and then I can use the gradient tool to manipulate that fill. So in order to do that, let's open up the gradient panel. You can see it. It looks like a little gradient, and gradient just means that it slowly changes from one color to another. So you start with black, end with white, start with yellow, end with green, etc. And so let's open this up, and I'll just bring this panel out into the window so you can see it and collapse the rest. Inside of this panel, you have the ability to apply a gradient fill. And so in this case, let's just grab the standard black and white gradient fill. So click right here, and black and white gradient fill will be applied by default. And this is the same gradient fill that you see going across this area up here. In order to change it with the gradient tool, all you have to do is simply click and drag across the shape in any direction you want the gradient to go. So I can go up and down, I can go diagonal, I can go back the other way, I can hold down the shift key to draw straight lines, as long as I make sure that it ends up in the right spot. Doesn't really matter how you do it, just as long as you get the end result that you want. You can also manipulate the gradient from over here inside of the gradient panel. So for instance, if I want there to be a little bit more white than black, if I want black just to be the smaller color over here on the right hand side, I can click and start to drag this endpoint over, and you'll notice as I do that the white becomes more predominant over here. If I drag this back over and then start to drag this slider over, then the darker element starts to overtake, just like that. And so you can control the positioning of this just by doing that. And if you accidentally leave an extra stop in there like this, it's okay. You can get rid of it just by dragging down, and it will automatically remove itself from there. You can also change the opacity of gradient stops by clicking the gradient stop first and then adjusting the opacity by clicking there. So see, I can set that to be transparent if I want. I can do semi-transparency or have it be completely opaque. You can control the angle of the gradient by clicking here and choosing between the set numbers that they have for you, or you can simply type in a number. So I could type in some arbitrary number like 77, press the tab key, and it would automatically adjust that to a 77-degree angle for me. You can switch the type of gradient from this drop down here. So let's go ahead and apply this standard horizontal gradient, just like that. Let's grab the selection tool, add a vertical gradient to this. So I'll just go ahead and click right here, and I'll change the angle of this to -90. Changing the angle to -90 makes it go straight up and down. Now over here, let's select this. Let's give it the same gradient by clicking right there, but let's change the type from linear to radial, and you get the exact same radial gradient that you have up here. If you were to grab the gradient tool now, you would have access to this control. So here I can control the shape of the gradient with this outer ring. I can control how far the gradient extends by clicking and dragging this little bar right here. And I can also control the rotation of the gradient by clicking around the outside of it and moving it around, just like so. If I wanted to reverse this gradient down here at the bottom, I would first apply the gradient, and then I would just take the stops and I would crisscross them. So let's take this one all the way over here, this one all the way over here, and then just like that. So that way I've got white on the outside and black on the inside. So that's how we replicate all those different types of gradients. Now, in addition to just these basic gradients, of course, you can create very complex gradients as well, and that involves adding multiple stops to this, what I call the gradient timeline. It's also called the gradient slider, but I like timeline because I consider this to be different points in time at which I'm dropping these gradients in there because they all occur across certain objects. So here in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to this artboard. You can also open up the artboards panel and double click on the advanced gradients artboard. Once you have the Advanced Gradients Artboard selected, what I want you to do is come out into the artboard window here, and I want you to select this red banner. And the red banner here, it looks okay. It goes along with the design fairly well, but we want to add some texture to it. See, we've got these little highlight things on top of it that, make it look a little three-dimensional, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of shimmer going on with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a custom gradient for this. In order to do that, I first have to apply a gradient fill overall. So let's just click right here, and let's add a black and white gradient. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the two main gradient points. So I'm going to click right here on the white gradient stop. And to edit a gradient color, you just double click. And that's going to open up with this little box here. You can choose from swatches or you can customize your own color. In this case, we're going to customize our own color. So let's do, for this one, 0% cyan, 99 magenta, 100% yellow, and 0% black. It's going to give me my initial color there. And we're going to do the same thing to this one right here. So let's go over here and let's add this in. So 0. We're pressing the tab key to navigate through these. 99, 100, and 0. Now the easier thing to do once you have actually determined the colors that you want to do is to add those to the swatches panel. And later on when we talk about adding swatches to the swatches panel, I'll show you how to do that. But in this case, I'm just going to build this gradient from scratch. So now I'm going to add 2 gradient stops to this. So we're going to add 1, 2, just like that. Then we're going to double click on the first one. And we're going to change this color here to 24% cyan, 100% magenta, 100% yellow, and 22% black. That's going to give it just a little bit of a darkening effect, almost like this is three-dimensional and kind of bending around. Do the same thing for this one right here. So let's double-click here. Same numbers come in here. So we're going to do 24%, 100%, 100%, and 22%. That's going to darken that one up quite a bit. Now we're going to add the final 3 gradient stops. So let's add 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to make sure this one in the middle is right in the middle, right about 50%. And we're just going to kind of evenly space these out, just like that. So the one in the middle, that's going to be kind of a highlighted tab. So let's do this, and let's do 0% cyan, 66% magenta, 65% yellow, and let's do 0% black. So that's going to give me just a little bit of a highlight there in the middle to complement that highlight that's already there. And then finally, we're going to do the same color on this stop as we did the stops on the end. So the easiest thing to do here, watch this. Let's drag this down to get rid of it. And let's drag this one over holding the Option or Alt key. That's going to duplicate it. Do the same thing here. Get rid of this one. Option or Alt, drag this one over. Just like that. That gives us just a little bit more of a gradual change between those. So there's a custom gradient we've created. It goes all the way across that, makes that a little bit more realistic. Now let's apply it to the edges of this as well. So let's change both of these by selecting them, holding down Shift, and then we'll just apply this gradient by clicking right here. But when I click that gradient, it doesn't look like it really goes with this. So let's adjust the angle of these gradients to sort of make it look a little bit more realistic. So in this case, let's just change this to something like 30 degrees. Should be okay. It kind of makes it go in line there. See the dark kind of lines up with that. And then this one over here, let's change that angle to be somewhere around 150. And that looks okay. I think it could be changed a little bit more. Let's change that to something like, did negative numbers, that's why it doesn't look right. Change it to 150. There we go. That looks a whole lot better right there. And it may even look better at 155. There we go. So now, if I move the gradient panel out of the way, you can see everything just kind of flows together. The shadows line up. And this is something that takes a little bit of time and practice to get used to. But now you have a better idea of how to create custom gradients. It's all about learning how many stops to create, and really and truly that's totally up to you and what you want your final result to be. But now you have the tools to build regular gradients and complex gradients. The only limitation is your imagination. Okay, it's time for us to talk a little bit about a complex form of color fills called gradients. And this is something we haven't touched on yet, and something that can really add a layer of depth and texture to your designs. So I think it's very important that you understand how to work with and use the gradient tools inside of Illustrator. Over here on the left-hand side of this artboard, we have several versions of gradients that you can see here. We have a horizontal linear gradient, a vertical linear gradient, and we have a radial gradient and the reverse of a radial gradient. These are the most basic forms of gradients that